You know, Eric, on this show, time and time again, founders talk about the importance of hiring great employees.
And they always say it's so hard and so important early on to hire the right person.
It makes a lot of sense that it's difficult because most founders don't have experience doing high-level searches or hiring top-level talent.
And they're also limited to their local talent pool a lot of the times.
That's why a lot of founders choose to work with SPMB, one of the fastest-growing executive search firms in the country. For over 40 years, SPMB has specialized in recruiting upper management and board members to early-stage VC-funded startups and larger growth stage companies too.
They bring the knowledge of a large global firm and combine it with the personalized service and attention of a boutique.
They have a dedicated team focusing on the Mountain West and Midwest emerging tech markets, so no matter where you are in the country, if you're trying to hire top-level talent, SPMB can help you out.
If that sounds like you can go to upside.fm/SPMB to learn how they are closing hundreds of C-level searches annually.
The light bulb kind of started to click. I wouldn't say it was like an instant on, it was more like a warm glow, but where we realized that there's all these competing priorities that leadership at companies know nothing about.
The startup investment landscape is changing, and world-class companies are being built outside of Silicon Valley. We find them, talk with them, and discuss the upside of investing in them. Welcome to Upside.
Hello, and welcome to the Upside Podcast, the first podcast finding upside outside of Silicon Valley. I'm Eric Hornung, and I'm accompanied by my co-host, Mr. Host with the Most himself, Jay Klaus.
We are back with the Upside Outside edition on the patio, hosting you, Eric, hosting you in our home. I'm looking down at the patio rug. We had a little fire last night, and I'm seeing that a renegade ember has burned a hole in this rug, just like it's burned a hole in the cushions of some of this outdoor furniture.
But I love the fire last night.
But the fire was nice.
I'm so happy that I was able to get down here a day early. We were able to hang out in person. I was able to see the house. And I am so impressed with you and friend of the podcast, Mal's, ability to host on a whim. I didn't even tell you I was staying here.
You know, it was good, though, because if you hadn't done that, I probably would have continued working last night. And I wouldn't have had a fun time. I wouldn't have had a memorable time. I would not have been as present here with Mal. And I would say you really helped me to reclaim some of my weekend.
You sometimes just got to schedule time for yourself, Jay. You got to schedule some personal time.
But sometimes you forget to schedule personal time, and it's helpful when somebody essentially does it for you.
And that's where Reclaim comes in. Today's guest is Reclaim.ai.
Patrick Lightbody is the co-founder of Reclaim.ai, which, Eric, we got in touch with because we were talking about how much we love SavvyCal for the show. Listeners of this show, SavvyCal is a new sponsor that we're very, very excited about. And if you need scheduling help, you might want to go to upside.fm/SavvyCal. But Reclaim, another interesting innovation in the scheduling space that at first I thought was a competitor to SavvyCal, and quickly realized, oh no, this is actually very complimentary and probably something I should download and start using right now.
I love when I run into people on Twitter. I was talking about my SavvyCal Zapier setup, my work versus personal calendars, and Patrick just popped into the comments and said, you really should try Reclaim. It's what I use, and it works perfectly with SavvyCal.
Founded in 2019 in Portland, Oregon, Reclaim is a smart calendar assistant that blocks flexible time for anything you care about. Reclaim is intelligence and automation for your calendar that aligns your priorities to the time you spend every week, empowering you to rapidly rebalance your schedule and defend your time to work on what matters. This is essentially, Eric, it's AI, it's a little robot in my calendar that actively blocks time off for things that I continuously deprioritize, like lunch, like exercise, like morning and afternoon catch-ups on email.
And those things are really important if you want to live the one life you have the best way you can.
It's true. And if you, dear listener, are trying to live your life, the one life you have, the best way that you can, you might want to visit our friends Ethos Wealth Management at upside.fm/ethos. Eric, Reclaim to this point has raised about $1.5 million. That happened in December of 2019. And on their website, they say that Reclaim is free right now through 2021.
I'm on board. You're on board. And dear listener, if you're on board with Reclaim, let us know. Shoot us a note at Upside FM or something a little longer at hello@upside.fm. Stack Reclaim together with SavvyCal and join the Upside scheduling stack.
Eric, we got to make some big changes to how we do operations here at Upside.
This feels like an intervention, Jay.
It's a bit of an intervention. I have to give you some tough love. We've had some calendar problems over the last couple weeks.
I've had some calendar problems. You don't have to throw the third person on this.
I do like to take the blame for you, but this one is on you. And Eric, I think we have found a solution to our calendar and scheduling problems.
But there are 101 scheduling tools out there, Jay, that can help you avoid the awkward dance of finding a time to meet.
But this tool is by far and away the best one I've seen, and I have looked at a lot of scheduling tools. And I am talking about SavvyCal.
SavvyCal makes it a collaborative effort, allowing you to personalize links and allow recipients to overlay their own calendar on top of yours.
It's going to make booking guests for Upside and even just one-on-one conversations a complete breeze. You got to see what this looks like. You got to see how it works, because you're going to ask, why wasn't it always this easy?
You can sign up for a free account at savvycal.com/upside. That's SAVVYCAL.com/upside. And when you are ready to test out a paid plan, use the code UPSIDE to get your first month free. On Upside, we'd like to start with a background of the founder. Can you tell us about the history of Patrick?
Yeah, and thanks for having me on here. I don't know, I'm I guess a computer scientist turned entrepreneur turned product manager, sort of. But the last part, I'd say, when people ask me like, so are you an engineer? Are you in product? I'm like, well, I sort of fell into product management, but I don't identify as a career product manager, even though prior to starting Reclaim, that was kind of what my thing for, 8 or 9 years. But no, I grew up in the Bay Area and did some computer science and, kind of classic stuff, trying to build video games and, what kids often do and how they get into tech, and started doing some software, real software in like C in high school. And then I went off to college and thought, hey, I've already learned a little bit of software. Why don't I try hardware? And so I briefly majored in electrical engineering, and I totally failed out of that. Like, that was just, once I got into analog, it was like no bueno. And so I switched back to computer science and graduated, and kind of just went and did a short career of professional software development for a couple startups. And it's at that point that I got the itch to do my own startups. And so I did a couple from there, really oriented in the testing and monitoring and kind of performance space. And that kind of set me on my career trajectory until Reclaim, basically, because I did a startup that was cloud-based cross-browser testing, although it wasn't called cloud at the time. The word hadn't been created, because this was like 2005, I believe, 2006. And so it was just VMware hosted on a server. And then did another startup that was cloud-based load testing. And then eventually, after I kind of got through the arc of those two startups, found my way to a role as the first product manager at New Relic. And I was with that company as it grew its product portfolio and went through its IPO, and then continued on there. I actually left and then came back for a little bit, but that's a story that doesn't really matter. I'd say it's a blip in the career arc, and then ultimately settled it on Reclaim, and we can talk more about why I did that.
When you think about leaving to start something new, are you doing kind of nights and weekends hustle until you feel like it's right? Or are you like, nah, I'm just going to cut this clean. I got this idea. I'm going to run after it.
Yeah. Like my brain's going back. I'm pausing because I'm like, okay, can I rewind and remember the transition when I was at Jive Software, transitioning to my first startup? And I want to say there was some definitely like a little bit of prototyping, but absolutely not a complete product or even a 1% complete product. It was more like just making sure kind of the concepts could roughly work. And I can't say if that was work that was relevant to the startup or work that was relevant to my just general open source contributions. Because I'd say that's the other part of my career that kind of threaded through everything, is that I was involved in open source most of that time, especially kind of out of college and then up through my focus on performance monitoring and testing. And just naturally, when you're kind of doing open source, it is a hobby. It is nights and weekends. And so, I found myself, especially with those first two, where it was about one of the open source projects I was involved in, a cross-browser testing framework called Selenium. That work was intertwined with the open source work to some degree, and it was me experimenting. But I'd say mostly I just took the plunge, and especially so with Reclaim, that was a little different. I was kind of thinking about the first two because I could imagine myself kind of doing some of that hustle on the side. It was very different coming to my third startup because there was about a 10-year gap between my second and third startup. And during that time, bought a couple of houses and had mortgages and moved a couple times, and had 3 kids and a dog and just like all the life stuff that kind of happens in your middle ages. And so there was no bandwidth by the third time to do something, significant on the side. What there was a little bit of discussions with venture capital, but nothing in terms of actually building it. We didn't actually build until we, basically a month after we both left our jobs.
I want to dive down a quick rabbit hole here. Maybe not too quick. Who knows? You don't actually know where a rabbit hole gets you. But open source. I think you're the first person we've had on the podcast who has talked about it at all. And I'm not familiar with the general culture. How do you get involved with open source projects, the open source community? And can you describe a little bit of the open source culture?
My description could be dated, although I suspect it's pretty much the same, except you replace IRC with Discord or Slack. But and I guess now there's pull requests, and there's a whole culture around if you just send a blind pull request versus if you kind of ingratiate yourself with the developers a little bit. But for the most part, I imagine it's pretty much the same as it was 20 years ago, which is, you find a project, you initially are using it, you find opportunities to improve it, and you kind of start to connect with the main developers behind it, slowly but steadily kind of become a familiar voice in that little community. And these can be very small communities. I mean, they might be, 5 or 10 people for certain projects. The main one I was involved in was a collection of open source projects that was called Open Symphony. And it was, I forget who exactly founded it, but it was, I want to say it might have been at least co-founding rights might have been the co-founders of Atlassian, Mike and Scott. But it was definitely a small group of people, like those guys, me, some folks from ThoughtWorks, the consulting agency. Agile, it was really heavy on Agile. And we all hung out in IRC and on FNet, hashtag Java, and just chatted about things. And I'd say, there were the regulars in that community who were all sort of becoming contributors to Open Symphony. And I don't know. I mean, that was basically it. There was a lot more community building back then. I'd say that's probably a little different, and you can kind of focus more on the code and the relationships. Back then, there was no GitHub, and so literally, there's a lot of infrastructure to build the community, and that was even after I was done contributing code, meaningful code to the community. I still spent another, I don't know, 5 or 10 years, sort of feathering down my involvement. And all I was doing was IT administration and keeping the website updated, just as a way to stay connected and kind of feel like I was, contributing something, even though I didn't have code contributions much anymore.
I'm going to pull us out of this rabbit hole, Eric. I'm sorry, because we could spend the entire time talking open source for sure. I want to hear what brought you to Portland and how difficult of a decision that was to move from your home area of the Bay Area to Portland.
Yeah. It wasn't a hard decision, but it was also a decision that I totally thought was going to be a 2-year stint. I was at a startup right out of college. I worked during college at Cisco Systems, which helped me come out of school debt-free, which was pretty awesome. And so I'm forever grateful to that company. But I also knew yeah, this is not the kind of like environment I want to work in. I want to be in something, much smaller, much more, direct connection to the customer. And so I immediately was just like looking through, job listings. And I don't know, this could be my memory just playing tricks on me, but I swear I was looking in classifieds. But, I'm not that old. And so I don't think I was, but I have a memory of seeing Spoke Software in like, tiny little like newspaper print. But whatever it was, I found them, small startup in Palo Alto. And it was a lot of fun. And we were this close to, I'm using my fingers here, to being LinkedIn. And it was actually a pretty important like business lesson for me, because I'd say the biggest problem was the business plan. And in particular, we thought it was just this example of like having the right tech, but just the wrong distribution channel. We thought that people really valued their privacy and would want a closed network for each individual enterprise, and that you sort of have like LinkedIn Enterprise, for every company. And then we spent all this time building like wide area graph, like shortest path graph stuff, so they could still connect with each other. Turns out nobody wanted that. They wanted just an easy to ube website. And so that company struggled and started falling apart. Amazing people came through there. And my cube mate at the time was Chris Kelly, who left Spoke to become the chief privacy officer of LinkedIn. So we were all kind of like figuring out what to do. And I happened, through those open source connections, I happened to know the Jive co-founders, because they were using a lot of the open source tech that I was working on. And they were, I don't know, 10 people, 9 people, something like that. And they just moved the company from New York City to Portland. They were had concluded, too expensive in New York, let's go find somewhere else to go. And they had just moved the company there, and they asked if I'd want to join. And I said, sure, because this company doesn't seem like it's going to be around much longer than I'm currently working at. And what the hell, this sounds like an adventure, and I'll be back in a couple of years. And clearly that wasn't the case.
Well, let's fast forward then. You spent the next, up to today, so like 15 to 16 years in Portland, going back to New Relic at one point, but then looks like in 2019 you started Reclaim. So talk to us about what started Reclaim for you and what convinced you to take the leap and go full time on that.
Yeah, I'd say there were a few motivations, a few sparks that kind of got that fire going. A couple of them were really early on in my career, actually. A little bit of time at Spoke Software. Something that sat with me for a long time was the power and the value of the data that just comes from people using everyday collaboration software. In the case of Spoke, we had an Outlook plugin that watched how people were emailing each other. And one of the unique things I still think is missing from LinkedIn is this idea of understanding how strong a relationship you have with someone by observing how frequent and what times you communicate with them. And so, that kind of just planted a seed in the back of my head for the last 20 years of like, I want to do something with that more down the road. Then I went to Jive Software, and, Jive was very much in kind of split between internal and external collaboration, but it got me excited about, the value of collaborative software. And productivity software was, close adjacent to that and kind of embedded in a lot of the collaboration tools. And so that was another one of those like, okay, store that away. Let's, maybe we'll come back to that at some point. And so those are for me, for my kind of personal motivations. From a kind of more professional and shared motivation, Henry, my co-founder, who I had met at New Relic and worked with for a number of years, he and I both had just kind of decided, our time here at this company is coming to an end, and it would be a lot of fun to work together. And, pretty quickly you realize like there's not a lot of places that are both looking to hire 2 VPs of product management concurrently. So, what can we do there? And obviously a startup seemed to be the, a quick solve for ensuring we were both working together. And then there's sort of like the idea behind it. And initially we weren't thinking about doing anything around productivity or calendars or anything like that. We were actually thinking about, kind of let's take what we've learned from New Relic and kind of extend it. And it wasn't the kind of natural thing that I think a lot of folks would have thought is like, well, why not just go do another monitoring kind of startup? And God knows we got that same question thrown at us by a parade of investors along the way. But it was more like we were taking a strategic look at the market and we were asking like, okay, look, it seems like with cloud and open source, the world that New Relic and Datadog and Grafana live in is going to be challenged. I don't mean to imply like it's a bad market to be in, but it's going to get compression, it's going to get churn. And so, if we were kind of going out and setting something out that could kind of benefit on this, like all this churn, what would that be? And we concluded like it'd be something that's about the workflows and the interactions that are just a little upstream and a little more removed from the actual telemetry data that those businesses were collecting. And so initially, as we kind of pulled on that thread, we initially were thinking something closer to like a platform for site reliability engineers where they could respond to incidents and kind of bring people together into a war room. There've been a couple startups kind of like that. And then we were kind of envisioning like all these workflows that could kick off, including, scheduling meetings to do retrospectives and things like that. And so that was kind of where we started. And we were just like casually talking with like friends and acquaintances about the idea and saying like, do you think we could do something that would help your teams be more efficient and be more productive? And what we're hearing from them is like, like that's cool, like agile, DevOps, cloud, open source, all those things are like nice and I sprinkle them into my team. But, honestly, the number one driver for whether I have a team that's really effective or not is how involved my engineering manager, my product manager, and my design manager are in the teams like day to day. And that resonated a lot because in our role where we were kind of, senior leaders, but not so senior that we were disconnected from like, teams on a pretty regular basis. We do a lot of operational reviews of teams and you'd kind of hear, a director of engineering or director of product management come in and say, okay, I've got these 3 teams and, this one's going really well. And the common thread was always like high engagement from at least one of those 3 roles. And so when we pulled the thread on that, what we found is, when we went and talked to those people, they're like, I would love to be, classic PM answer would be, I'd love to be involved in more of the day-to-day with my team and be in the, in the room with them, physically or virtually. But, I get pulled into sales escalations. I get pulled into, project management reviews. I get pulled into all these things. And, the light bulb kind of started to click. I wouldn't say it was like an instant on, it was more like a warm glow, but where we realized that there's all these competing priorities that leadership at companies know nothing about. They, every day it's like the meme of the guy sweating is trying to press the button. Then it's like, accept this meeting or accept this meeting. And it's a decision that in isolation is small, right? A single choice of an hour where you spend your time is not going to make or break a company. But over time, those choices wear down the employees and also result in fragmented focus for companies themselves. And that started getting us really excited because it started to sound like, hey, this might be something we can pursue that helps make individual people happier, but also like helps solve inefficiencies at kind of the enterprise level. And so that was where we decided, let's go do this.
So how has the product changed over time? Because when I was doing research for this episode, I wouldn't have thought that you were helping enterprise customers help their teams prioritize their time better necessarily. Like to me, I thought it might even be a consumer play. So talk to me about how the product has changed over time and what the strategy has been.
I mean, the short answer for that is because we're not yet. And although that is our long-term mission, it doesn't make a lot of sense to put that on our website, not because it's some secret, but because we're trying to appeal to the prosumers, I guess, not the consumers, but the professional individual workers who are inundated with demands for time. So our first mock-ups that we started with and then ultimately went into prototyping were really oriented around this idea of meeting defragmentation and meeting and time alignment to your priorities. And I'd say it's still something that's really important to our mission in the like medium term, maybe even near term now. But we learned something along the way. I'll get to in a second about and why we didn't launch with that capability. But the basic idea was, fire up Reclaim and write in your, up to 5 stated priorities in whatever scope and orientation and time duration that you wanted. And they could be personal or professional. We had sort of advice like, ideally most of them are professional, and ideally most of them are measured in like a few weeks to a few months. Evergreen goals. This is kind of like stuff I was bringing in just from like coaching, other leaders in New Relic. Like an evergreen goal of build a great product is not really going to orient you around, thoughtful decisions around how you spend your time. And then similarly, a task is not really going to be helpful. Like that's not a priority and it's not thematic. And so we asked our about 100 or so users we recruited to the prototype to write these things in, and then they could go and with color coding associate the time on their calendar with those priorities, and then they'd get back some analytics. And that was basically what we built. The idea was that eventually we'd make recommendations around how to move things around, or how to say no and give you some kind of like initial canned responses that could help you save some of that political capital, but also give a little more context to why you were declining or delegating requests for your time. It was interesting. I think it's still something that, those ideas are not bad ideas. They're things that high functioning executives do all the time. But we learned pretty quickly it wasn't the right place to start software because it asked a lot of information up front. In a sense, it wasn't that much information. Writing 5 things in and then associating your week's agenda with those 5 things is in a way, from a data entry standpoint, a lot less than, say, getting started with an advanced email client where you might label, have a dozen labels and you might have hundreds of things to rip through, or thousands, or infinite, depending on how you've been managing your backlog. And so in that sense, from a manual labor standpoint, it wasn't that much more work. But these were like really intense questions to ask someone, actually. Like the moment, like we would watch our users and they'd just freeze. They wouldn't know what to say. Because the reality is like, even if you ask yourself some weeks, no matter how high functioning you are, some weeks you're just like, God, what is the top 2 or 3 things that are most important today? So
this was going to ask. I was going to ask, what are those intense questions that you were asking?
That's literally it. It's like, what are your most important things? And it sounds so simple, but distilling it to a list of, say, 3 to 5 is actually pretty hard for people. At least when it's like scoped right. It's pretty easy to say like, learn, grow my career, family, but those aren't going to like help you make any thoughtful decisions about how you might better architect your time. So yeah, that would have been kind of fall 2019. And we concluded that the best thing for us to do was to get to action much faster, to do something to meaningfully help the user in some way, that an analytics an MVP that was just analytics was not going to be compelling enough to keep users to come back to the product on a regular basis, and more importantly, to promote it. It would just kind of go to the back of their mind. And, all the classic startup stuff of like, a lot of people we talked to were friends. So naturally they told us, how great of an idea it was, but you could observe in the behaviors that they weren't coming back to try it out every day or every week. So I don't know if you'd call it a pivot as much as I'd call it initially sort of an additional, like we had initially we had the idea that was our pro version of our product, and that was going to kind of keep building along, but we would go make like a free utility, even actually under an entirely different brand to start, that was easy to search and discover, and that would be kind of a feeder into Reclaim, the pro version of the product that we were building. And that was where what we called Life Work Calendar was born. It wasn't Work Life Calendar because we couldn't get that domain, and we were low on funding and scrappy. So we went with Life Work Calendar. And to this day, you can go to lifeworkcalendar.com and it'll redirect you to Reclaim. And we decided to just like do one thing that we knew we could do action on, that was like a meaningful problem that all the people we'd been talking to had, which was the issue of blocking out time for personal commitments. I'm sure you both have this challenge as well, right? You probably have more than that too. You probably have like your work calendars and projects like this and, side gigs and personal calendars. Like,
All that.
2 is a minimum for most people. And then some people have many more than that. I could empathize with the stress of it all, as silly as it is. It's like those moments where you're like driving to the dentist office and then like a sales rep calls you, is like, where the hell are you? The customer's here. I've got the lunch platter set out. You're supposed to be giving a session and you're just like, oh my God, how did I screw this up? And so we just said, let's just like build something that we can automate and that will keep us like in people's minds on a regular basis. And it's like, there was a executive at New Relic, Hillary, who joined it she was our president and CRO for a number of years. She came from Salesforce, and she would often talk about the stick in the eye problem. What is the thing that is just most acutely painful? And like, this was one of those simple pain points that we could solve pretty quickly. We'd already built up the infrastructure to sync with calendars. And so it wasn't a big leap to start taking action. And so that's where we got started. So in February, I want to say it was February 2020, maybe late January, we launched that product on Product Hunt and started, getting real users.
I wish I would have found that product in January 2020 when you said we both have calendars. The way we met was literally on Twitter. I think I laid out that I have multiple calendars and it sucks. They don't sync. And you responded. So definitely something that I feel deeply personally.
Talk to me, Patrick, about, since this is an audio medium and people can't see the GIFs that are on your website, walk me through a user's experience using Reclaim and how that looks for them.
Well, literally, the onboarding process walks you through basically the 3 major features we have today. There's a couple other sort of, I'd call them minor features, but the 3 things we ask you to do are, well, one, you got to connect your calendar. So there's got to be some element of trust. It's a less sensitive data source than, say, email, but it's still a pretty sensitive data source. Lots of people have different opinions about, who can see what on their calendar, but ultimately Reclaim needs to see all of your work, at least your work calendar, and have full access to it. And so, there's an element of just, what the hell is this crazy robot going to do to my calendar? And is it going to just cancel all my meetings or something like that? So, a couple steps are just building trust. Part of why, some parts of like brand and design are just also trust exercises to make sure people feel like we're not this like rinky dink operation. Joke's on them. We're only 8 people, but no, I tease. So then once they've connected their calendar, then we just ask them 3 questions. It's literally just 3 questions. Do you want us to block out lunch for you? And we give them a little animation that just shows how with Reclaim, we will adapt your lunch meeting that we put on your calendar each day. And we do some clever things there. It's not necessarily obvious with the first animation, but people kind of discover this as they use it for a few more days. Not only are we moving the meeting, we are throttling the free and busy time on the calendar so that we can deal with the core tension that we set out to solve from the very beginning, which is busy, especially kind of that meaty middle management layer at companies. Busy professionals are in this constant battle between demands for their time from other people and demands for their time internally to get heads down work done. And often they're comfortable trading off a little bit of those demands for their own kind of internal time, as long as they still get it done at some point. And so, the classic example is lunch, right? Most busy professionals are okay eating their food. They usually do eat their food, not always, but they try to. And they're okay kind of shifting it around sometime between, say, like 11 a.m. and 2 p.m. So we ask them, do you want us to do that? And a lot of them say yes. And then we ask them, do you want time to catch up on your inbox? Because that's another one of those universal pain points. And we show how there's kind of 2 blocks at the beginning and the end of the day that, again, will kind of dynamically move around. And then finally we ask them, do you want us to block out time for your personal calendar? And if they say yes, then they need to connect the second account, and then they get a little confetti pop and they're in the product. And when they go look at their calendar, they start to see, blocks of time that say personal commitment and lunch and catch up. And, it's generally a pretty delightful experience for them.
I feel like I am right in the wheelhouse of who you're talking to here. So I'm going to ask you questions as a user here.
Yeah.
If let's say I start the onboarding process and I say, yes, actually, I forget to eat lunch every day. I would love for you to give me lunch, but I have a standing meeting once a week with like my leadership team at noon, right? So does Reclaim move that without asking me or prompting me? Do I have to be the calendar event creator to move that? How's that work?
We don't yet mess with moving meetings around. That's naturally in our trajectory, because our long-term vision is kind of aligning the time of an organization to the highest priorities of an organization, and while still kind of respecting the needs of the individual people and their priorities, and trying to get the best path forward for everybody. And to do that, we're going to have to orchestrate meetings. But today we only mess with, and that's part of, I think, why people are comfortable getting into our stuff, is that we can say confidently, we will not mess with your meetings. That stand up, for example, will not be touched. Instead, your lunch will move around the stand up. So if you ever convince the rest of the team and say, what the hell, everyone, this is my lunch hour and you can move the meeting, then Reclaim will jump in and take that slot. But until that day, will be before or after it. Those are called habits, and you can set policies, kind of what's the min and max duration you'll be comfortable having. What's the earliest starting time, the latest ending time, which days of the week do you want those things to happen on, that kind of stuff.
I'm literally working through the onboarding right now as Eric asks his next question. It's interesting because the first question, it's like sync your work calendar. And I feel like I prioritize work and personal independent work kind of the same. So I had this like immediate question of like, well, which one do I do? But I'm going full on work first, and I'll check back in after Eric asks whatever next question he was asking.
How's the initial response of the market to this? Because when I first looked at it, and I think when Jay first looked at it, like, oh, it's a calendar app, and there's all of these calendar apps. There's Calendly, there's SavvyCal, there's all of this stuff that's going on out there. Do people tend to lump it in off the bat with it's another calendar app, or how's that felt from both investors and users?
Yes, they do. And there's lots of calendar and calendar adjacent applications and services, but we're in a small group. Where I wouldn't say we're in our own group, but it's like on one hand or less that you can count that are doing what we're doing. There's a lot that are in the scheduling space. You mentioned Calendly and SavvyCal and X.AI and Mixmax. There's quite a few that are in kind of like meeting, note-taking, kind of productivity. Those would be like the Fellow app, Navigator. And obviously there's calendars themselves, Fantastical, VimCal. But there's not too many that are kind of in the business of orchestrating the time on the calendars. And we're in that category. And so the first thing is, it's not well understood. I mean, that's not a thing people have really ever considered, that robots might move events on my calendar around on my behalf. And so right off the bat, there's an element of like, people don't search for that. Robotic calendars or calendar automation. That's not a thing they search for. Two, there's the trust and comfort element of it. And so at some point, we're going to have to go on the offensive a little bit more and do a little more education. But at the moment, there's enough kind of early adopters, people like you all, who once you find it, kind of intuitively grok it, that keeps us, that we get enough signups just from that to keep us going for a while. So yeah, and then there's naturally kind of questions like, how do you relate to these other things? Why aren't you a calendar app? That kind of stuff. And we have answers for all of them. I don't know if we have enough time for me to give you all the answers, but ultimately I will say we concluded that the external scheduling space, the Calendlys of the world, there's a lot of really great companies out there, and we didn't feel like we had anything new to add to that problem. But we did feel like we actually had something that could make that solution better all that throttling I mentioned of free busy time really works well with those services. It's like peanut butter and jelly because now you're offering up a lot of availability, and then Reclaim kind of steps in with like circuit breaker logic and kind of blocks out the rest. But we didn't feel like we had anything new to add directly there. And then on the app front, because our ambition is to be an enterprise software solution in the long run, we had to ask ourselves, like, what's the best way to get wide adoption? Frankly, it's really hard to come in and offer an alternative, either front end or full front end plus platform of any of the core productivity software. I mean, that's partly why Slack was so impressive, because they built a new platform and were able to kind of own that whole experience. But the reality is very few other companies have had traction doing that. Quip, founded by, one of the best technologists and entrepreneurs out there, and had a great exit of like, I don't know, $800 million or something, struggled really displacing any sort of office productivity. There's so many calendaring apps out there. There's one called Woven that just recently announced that it's shutting down. You're just not going to find success, I don't think, getting all the employees of a company to use it. And if you build features that depend on everybody using that software, I think you're asking for trouble from a distribution standpoint. So we decided what we wanted to build was something that could work with whatever calendaring app you used and worked with whatever scheduling service you used, and that we could kind of slot in and be compatible, but still have some viral properties.
You also have a integration with Slack. Is the goal to have integrations with whatever messaging service you use too?
Yeah, eventually Teams will be added there as well. We're kind of focused on kind of the Google, I don't think there's an acronym for it, but the workspaces, Slack, whatever stack. Yeah.
I just finished the onboarding. Beautiful experience. Very easy to understand. As I'm putting this together, if the first thing I connect is my work calendar, and then I connect that to my personal calendar, who's able to see that? Like if my work calendar is an organization on G Suite, is my employer able to see everything on my calendar and understand how I'm spending my time if I signed up as an individual?
A quick aside, the topic of privacy and visibility and calendars is one that there's a ton of education that still needs to happen. I mean, it is not easy, and Google struggles itself, because there's sort of the calendar privacy level, and then there's the individual events have privacy levels. And then there's the topic of like, when you bring a third party like Reclaim into the mix, what can Reclaim see? What can the organization see? At the end of the day, whatever you connected as your work calendar, we call it the Reclaim calendar. That's the thing that we keep data on. And I can just refer folks to our website if they have questions about our privacy policies and security and all that kind of stuff. But we take that seriously. All the other calendars, we don't actually even store in our database. It's all ephemeral. So just when we see something change, whether it's a side gig or a personal calendar, just as it comes through, we kind of push it into whatever destination it needs to go to. Your work calendar being one source, but we actually support, if you go into the calendar sync settings, you'll see you can kind of set up sync policies in every which direction. And in there are some privacy questions. I think this gets to kind of some of the interesting stuff we're doing around privacy, because you can either block it out as just a simple busy block, and then your work would never know that you have a job interview. You could block it out as a personal commitment. And it's funny, we've heard from some users, they're like, yeah, I didn't want to do personal commitment because that one's marked actually as public. And they said, I worry that if my employer sees I have too many personal commitments, they might realize I'm starting to job search. And so then you can also bring the full details over. And we try to caution folks to be careful with that. Like that model can work really well if you're, say, bringing your work calendar into your personal one, or say you're a consultant and you have 3 or 4 account, work identities, and you're bringing it into your consultancy account. Those models work great, but you might not want to put your personal calendar into your work calendar verbatim. You might also not want to bring client A's data and event details into client B's calendaring system. And so, we're still working with customers. We hold regular office hours and we're pretty active on support, but I think there's still work to be done to answer those questions for users.
So right now I see that this is free to try through the end of 2021. Mm-hmm. What does this look like beyond 2021? Is this, you mentioned you're going to the prosumer first. Do you see this as being a direct to consumer company, or do you see this being a tool that you go to the corporations and they pay for and give seats to their people?
A bit of both, not unlike, I'd say Atlassian was one of the early pioneers of that model, Salesforce to some degree, Slack as well. Our vision is people have a need, they find us, they should be able to sign up and use either our free products or pay for with their own credit card or a corporate card and just use it as an individual for a while. And then from there, we see expansion into teams. That's pretty common. We'll see on our sign up list for the day these like bursts of activity from a single company. And you can kind of almost tell exactly what happened behind the scenes. Somebody sent a message and say, I just found this cool thing. And then more people sign up. And you can see this in our pricing plan. Even though we are not charging this year, we want to give people confidence and understanding of like where it's going to go. The idea is that eventually a team leader, maybe like a director or a VP, could buy a number of seats still on that same card, but buy 5 or 10 seats for their team and then just do kind of one expense running it through. Once we've had enough adoption, we've got some companies that are hundreds of people and we're coming on half of the employees are on board, where we can go call those people up and say, we have a meaningful percentage of your employee base signed up for us. Why don't we talk about an enterprise plan? And that would be where a more traditional enterprise motion would come in, but it'd be very well seated. I'd say in our broad space, the closest comparison would be someone like Calendly, who, for years has gone kind of to the individual, but they've got a small sales and marketing team oriented towards enterprise, and they're growing that really fast now too. Who incidentally, by the way, the CRO there was the old CMO from New Relic. So we're very friendly with those folks just because I love Patrick, the CRO over there.
How do you think about where you set the price? I see it's scratched out, but $9 per user per month for Pro, and then $20 per user per month for Team. Is that just a stick in the air? This seems about right, or?
We've had a decent amount of conversations with our early users, kind of gauging value. There's actually a kind of a product market fit survey that users will get when they sign up. And then there's kind of relative comps in the industry. I'd say like Superhuman, for example, has set the high bar. And I would say it's probably too high for the large scale adoption that we're aiming for. So we kind of knew, somewhere between $0 and probably $30 for some element of productivity-ish type of software was where we wanted to be. And then we kind of just, work backwards from there. And we've gone through a few iterations of the segmentation and price fencing to kind of land on what you're seeing today.
What is your vision for 3 to 5 years from now for Reclaim, and what needs to happen for that to be true?
Yeah, my vision is that hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of working professionals view their use of Reclaim as a competitive edge to be more effective and more efficient and happier in their life and more effective in their professional career. And in large part because of that, corporate leadership, the C-suite, has access, I'll say it's an early version of the product in the 3 to 5 year time horizon, but that corporate leadership also has access to an enterprise version of Reclaim that gives them a sense that their company has a competitive edge because they're organizing themselves and making choices about where to spend their time and what programs to pursue, and more importantly, what programs not to pursue. That they view Reclaim as a critical tool for, say, quarterly planning, annual planning, week-to-week operational reporting. That's a big vision. I think long-term that puts us in the same leagues of, I'd say it's a new market in a sense, but it's broadly speaking, not unlike or somewhat adjacent to like project management and CRM type of software where there's this sort of system of record that executives go to understand the health of their business. We think there's another and maybe even more important system of record, which is where people are spending their time and how it's oriented towards the goals of the departments in their company. So that's where we'd like to get to. there's also, those are like two nice goals, and they're the enterprise one really needs the bottoms up data entry from people to provide. But at the same time, we can't betray our customers' trust. They're entrusting us to help make them the best version of them. And that might include making time for job interviews with another company. And, obviously we're not going to share that information with their employer. And so we'll have work to do to figure out like where's the boundary and how do we do it in a way that gives high trust and that is mutually beneficial. But generally, I'd say the approach is going to be around work-related priorities. Those are the ones that are pretty safe for a double opt-in of people to say, yeah, I'm actually comfortable sharing, with my employer how much time I spent on program X or project Y, week to week to help the company be more effective. I think we'll see some good traction on that. And that kind of work, that's the transition point. That's where Reclaim, I'd say in the next 1 or 2 years, we'll start to build that enterprise version of that product, because we'll then have, a very complex and sophisticated graph of data that's the intersection of priorities, topics, people, and time. And that's basically what makes companies tick.
Well, Patrick, this has been awesome. I'm looking forward to giving Reclaim a spin myself. I've synced up my travel time, my catch-ups, my lunch times. It's all happening here. So thank you. If people want to learn more about Reclaim or try it out themselves, where should they go after the show?
Reclaim.ai.
Jay, what's your favorite podcast app named after a fruit?
Gotta be Apple.
Can you think of any other ones?
I tried really hard, but I didn't want to wait for too long. I didn't want too much dead air.
Hey, you know what's worse than dead air? Not getting reviews on Apple Podcasts from your listeners.
Oh my gosh, it is the worst. Every day that I wake up and I don't have a new review on Apple Podcasts, I just look up at the sky and I go, ah!
I like how the first thing you do when you wake up is to look at Apple reviews.
If only I was lying. But I'm not, and I'm looking for new reviews for Upside on Apple Podcasts, Eric, and if you are listening to this right now, you could be that person that helps get the day started right.
All you have to do is go to Apple on your iOS device or web browser, log in, and leave us a review. 5 stars would be nice. 4 stars would be great. Let's do 5 stars.
Let's do 5 stars. Definitely prefer 5 stars. Even if you don't use Apple Podcasts as your preferred listening app on an iPhone, please take a moment to rate us there anyway. It helps us bring on great guests. It helps us climb the charts. Our show will get better if you do this very simple act. So please.
All right, Jay, we just spoke with Patrick from Reclaim. We haven't looked at or talked about our 4 outro questions in quite a long time. New listeners to the show might say, what are you guys doing here?
What is this? What is this third segment of the show? Well, dear listener, it is emulating the 4-part process of a deal memo advocated for by Jason Calacanis in his book, Angel. And Eric, off the top of our head, let's go. Let's see what these questions are. How committed is this founder? What are the founder's chances of success in this business and in life? What does winning look like in terms of revenue and my return? And why has this founder chosen this business?
So a lot of those are founder-centric, and we're going to talk a lot about Patrick in this debrief. But I want to start with the business itself. Let's talk about the product. Let's talk about what return would look like. How big is this problem? How big is this issue?
Well, as it stands, and since talking with Patrick, I have been an everyday user of Reclaim, for full disclosure. And I have to say, I did it on the call. The actual onboarding experience of the product is beautiful. This isn't the question you asked, but I wanted to talk about it. Onboarding experience is beautiful. It very dynamically blocks time for me for the priorities that I say I want it to block time for. And it's great in that way. As I said in the intro, product is free through 2021. So non-revenue generating right now. And Patrick spoke about his goal of getting this in the hands of companies and businesses to help their employees be more productive. So when your market is companies, businesses, B2B, generally my ears perk up a little bit because I think that's a shorter path to money, to good money. But I don't quite know the price point on this, but the market is very, very large. So how much does the price point matter? I don't know. What are you thinking?
I came into this thinking that every calendar app is a calendar app. Everything's trying to do the same thing, everything's scheduling, but he made a very pointed distinction between scheduling apps like your Calendly's and your SavvyCals and what he's trying to build with Reclaim. And I had never thought about the segmentation of the digital calendar like that before. So if we look at scheduling, there's obviously a ton of money there. I mean, Calendly can be a billion-dollar-plus company, and how many other scheduling apps are there? We have our favorite with SavvyCal, and I think there can be multiple billion-dollar scheduling apps. On the productivity side, I'm kind of inclined to agree with Patrick that that's a bigger market because it's subject to, like, scheduling is transactional. It happens once, and you can use the same links to schedule things, and it's great. But with productivity, it gets smarter and better over time, the more you use it and the more people that use it. So there's some semblance of a network effect, maybe not a pure network effect there, which makes me feel like it's stickier, bigger, and potentially huge.
I could see that. You're talking about Calendly and its valuation. I knew I had actually seen a headline about this, even though Calendly has been a historically quiet and private company. Valued in January of 2021 at $3 billion, which blows my mind, actually.
Bootstrapped.
Crazy. I agree with you on the productivity front. Also, if the company goes down a route of helping people be more productive and, wink, wink, reclaim their time, time is a very measurable value for businesses. So it gets easy to justify your pricing when you can point to the number of hours reclaimed and tie that to people's salaries, to hourly rates, things like that. So I could see it being priced higher than you might expect for what you may initially think is a scheduling tool for companies, but we didn't quite get into that pricing model, so I'm kind of shooting the breeze on where that might land.
I think that it falls into our very large market space, and it would be nice to be able to do a bottoms-up analysis, but we don't have the data for it, Jay. So we'll say market's large. We're excited about it. There seems to be opportunity for a large return here. And anecdotally, it is something that I will use as soon as they launch the Outlook version of it, because I think that there are a lot of people who don't work in tech and don't have Gmail-based work emails. The majority of the old professional world is an Outlook-based experience. And when that links together, when he can do Gmail and Outlook, there are a lot of people who just currently put busy on their calendar who would use this product to make sure that they are communicating with their work calendar and not double booking themselves, as I do so frequently.
You sure do, but since we've moved our scheduling over to SavvyCal, that has pretty much ceased to be an issue. And that's a genuine plug for our friends over at SavvyCal, upside.fm/SavvyCal. It has improved Eric and I's scheduling relationship for the better. I guess that's what improved means. Improved means for the better.
Can you improve something to the worse?
I don't think so.
Can you get something more negative and call it improvement?
Back to
Patrick. I improved my losses, so I have a higher net operating loss going forward. Yeah, it's possible.
It's possible. Back to Patrick, the founder. Spent a lot of time at New Relic in product management. Has a lot of great experience and skill built out of his product management and engineering background. And you see in the product just how beautiful it is. And I know we're talking about a B2B model here, but at the end of the day, this is used by individuals, a lot of individuals who I think will probably have fairly high standards for what the experience looks like. And I truly, truly appreciate software that looks beautifully made. I know it's a small thing, but
it's gorgeous.
It's important.
Patrick's a little different than the typical founder we have on Upside. He's definitely much more in the true, pure tech model. We talked a lot about open source in that model in this interview. We talked about his time kind of hacking open source projects and codes. He's also a third-time founder. That's a little different than the founder we tend to have on this show. We talk about starting on second base a lot on this show. Seems like Patrick's kind of, around in second, maybe on his way to third. He's built and exited 2 companies.
Which, if I'm an investor, that carries some weight, for sure. We haven't talked about Portland, Oregon on this show much, Eric. And we didn't dig a whole lot into Portland in the interview, but wanted to call out new territory. We're getting new ground.
We did talk to someone in Portland, Oregon. We talked to Periodic Edibles. And off the record, I've been chatting here and there with guys from Silicon Forest, which are building a media company focused on all of Oregon. So maybe we'll have them on the show to talk more deeply about the Oregon ecosystem.
What does it mean when you say off the record when we're clearly on the record?
I said it off the record.
Well, dear listener, we'd love to hear what you think about Reclaim.ai. Give it a run. It's free through 2021. As I said, I'm using it. I enjoy it. It pairs well with your scheduling stack of SavvyCal, or even Calendly if you go that way, but we're SavvyCal people over here at Upside. Upside.fm/SavvyCal. That's SavvyCal. We'd love to hear what you think about this episode, what you think about Reclaim. You can tweet at us at UpsideFM or email us hello@upside.fm. And we'll talk to you next week. That's all for this week. Thanks for listening. We'd love to hear what you think about this episode, so tweet at us at UpsideFM or email us hello@upside.fm and let us know. You can learn more about us and browse our entire back catalog of episodes at upside.fm. And if you love our show, please leave a review on Apple Podcasts. That goes a long way in helping us bring high-quality guests to the show.
Rocky, I'm Sylvester. Over underrated, super underpaid. Today I'm gonna get it, and there's nothing in my way. About time. I've been out here for a minute.